you represent? Because apparently there's a big crowd here and they want to know who are the so-called media. Freddie, held by the Supreme Court, will grant a petition to disqualify 2 candidates who are carrying the name of Santiago and not by accident either. In other words, these candidates were purposely set. Kung wala akong kwentang tao, bakit sila magpapatakbo ng 2 Santiago? Abel, nahirapan sila maghanap ng defensor kasi wala nang defensor labas ng Western Visa. Pero pati na sa panahon para lang magpatakbo ng 2 Santiago, Abel. At bakit sila gagastos magpatakbo ng isang tao na ding kasama ko na kandidato? Yan, sagot na kaagad yan sa pagtatanong, ano wala ka ng eventuality that the COMELEC might deny my petition. I wish to announce today the will of the people. Ganon ka-broad ang powers ng COMELEC. Huwag silang magpapanggap-panggapan na walang ganyang kapangyarihan ang COMELEC na nandyan mismo sa batas. The powers of the COMELEC are that particular commissioner when she's sitting in the COMELEC. Some man in advocating that these petitions for disqualification, particularly filed by a candidate with bona fide political history of this country. They struck it out in 1992, and because it practiced consisting of justices of the Supreme Court and certain senators, publicly announced and supported his announcement with documentation to show that Operation Dagdag Bawas was implemented by this corrupt administration in 1995 and that the level of cheating was so high that it eventually affected the final outcome of the elections. For in 1992, my political enemies claimed that there was cheating but it was not enough to affect the outcome of the presidential elections. That, of course, as you realize, is a fallacious argument. You cannot say, yes, there was cheating, but it was not enough to affect the results of the presidential elections in 1992. How do you know that it did not affect the results? In 95, no less than a justice of the that there was massive cheating in 95 to operate that in 1998. Mr. Ramos plans to do all of the above. Number 1, postpone the elections on the ground of the MILF turmoil in Mindanao. You can see already the dark hand of Malacanang. A habit, therefore, that we should call presidential elections the second Monday of May. Technically, Ramos can still postpone the May 11 elections until December 31, 1998 because it would still be the 6th year. So I expect that he is going to be extremely busy with his dirty tricks between now and the next few months. Therefore, in the light of this expected and reinforced implementation of the dreadful and the dreaded, notorious Operation Dagdag Bawas on the part of the administration, I hereby formally declare I will not be responsible for the anger of the university students and for the anger of the Ilonggos not only in Western Visayas but throughout the country. Should Operation Dagdag Bawas succeed once more for the 3rd time in affecting the final outcome of the elections, in 1992 for the sake of national peace and order, I myself went on the streets and begged the students to refrain from holding street demonstrations. I call for such restraint. Once was evil enough. Christian compassion, it will be stupidity. And I refuse to be party to any act of stupidity. Let it fall on the head of the Operation Dagdag Bawas. I appeal to all the communities of faith, whether they are Christians or Muslims, whether they are Protestants or Catholics or Iglesia ni Cristo. I appeal to all communities of faith throughout our country. Please monitor the elections and prevent Operation Dagdag Bawas. Daniwala ako, hindi wag na lang ako pumunta dito sa Iloilo. Manatili na lang ako doon sa bahay ko. Pagkatapos, genuine nationwide survey. Ano ang K? Anong karapatan itong mga supporters ni Liming centers ng ating syudad? Pagkatapos ninyo makita iyan, meron pa kayong lakas ng loob magtanong sa akin na wala ng Miriam Magic at kung sinong pangalan ng kandidato ang gagamitin ninyo kasapi ng sindikato. Maya-maya makikita mo nakatihaya sa tabi ng daan yung taong yan, patay na at nabaril o nasaksak na katalikod. Bago kami nagsama noong 1992 sa PRP, tinanong ko siya, paliwanag mo lang. Itong mga sinasabit, naririnig ko at ako'y RTC judge ng Quezon City. Ng sasakyan, na nakita naman ninyong nasira ang mukha ko at pinakita ang videotape niya noong convention sa nagpadala ba siya ng consolation card niya sa akin? At nang tinataya ko ang buhay ko bilang immigration commissioner na pananalo dahil peace and order ng plataforma niya, ang pinakamataas na kidnapping nandito dyan sa Maynila. Ayan. Senator Francisco Tatag might want to make an opening statement.
This is my magic. She's as strong as ever.
Yes!
One of my idol senators, Senator Miriam. Of course, that includes you, Senator Tatag.
Sino sa ating bansa, lalaki man o babae man. At huwag na tayo mag-alala, iproklama na lang natin diretso na presidente siya. Kung iisip ng isang Pilipino, yun ba ang pag-iisip ng isang Ilonggo at may nagmamalaki pa naman tayo ng buong bansa sa gusto nila. Basta gagawin ko ang lahat ng makakayanan ko. Iyan, sigurado, surrender ako kung walang Diyos ang daigdig. Dahil kami niyang pinakain at namigay siya kaagad na ganitong halaga para mag-organize sa mga baryo at sa mga barangay. Sa tingin ninyo, saan nila kinuha dato ako yung talagang papel ng kandidato, mang-amo ng butante? Kaya kung kaya ko lang, mamimigay ako sa inyo ng pera. Kung magkano ang binibigay sa inyo ng pinakamayamang kandidato, si Estrada man o si using food in such abundance, then it is essential that we must have warehousing, storage, or ice storage facilities. Kinanglanon nato, total, kasi mayaman na tayo sa litas na kayamanan. Marami tayong isda, halimbawa, sa estansya at sa iba pang lugar, sa Antique, sa Capiz. Dapat meron tayong ice plant na pinatayo ng gobyerno at maaaring pakikinabangan ng maski sinong mamamayan sa napakababang presyo at cost. Yan ang pinaka-importante dyan sa lahat. We need to preserve our produce. We also need warehouses para kung mabang. In fact, the major food producing was electorally weak when he started. Is not gaining any momentum whatsoever. Remains possibly one of the weaker candidates. Kung 10 kami, he belongs to the lower half, that is to say the weaker. If we classify them into stronger and weaker, it belongs to the weaker class. If my perception is correct, I have no doubt in my mind, Mr. Ramos will find a way to jump his own candidate. That is how I distrust Mr. Ramos. Now, for the benefit, yes.
Yeah, we will allow one more question, and we will, after this, we will get the parting statements of
Senator Santiago, upon the
President can only be expected from the Associated Press correspondent. What was the first question, please?
who do you think
Who do you think is your strongest? For any opposition candidate in any election, always the strongest opponent is the administration candidate, provided we are talking, as we are, of a country like the Philippines, which is, number one, a third world country, in other words, poverty-stricken country, and number two, a corrupt country. Remember, the Philippines was classified by Transparency International last year as the number 2 most corrupt country in Asia or in Southeast Asia. Alright, so these premises are given. We're corrupt and we're poor. As long as this is the environment, the strongest candidate is always the administration candidate in any elections. For the simple reason that, number one, it is the administration and the administration only which has the capability to launch massive fraud or Operation Dagdag Bawas. Number two, since this is a corrupt country, administration has no qualms of conscience about using government personnel, government facilities. Principally, when we talk of facilities, Air Force airplanes and helicopters, the boats of the Navy and the Coast Guard, and even the land transportation of the National Police. When we talk of personnel, we have actual civil blatantly and without any justification whatsoever the constitutional ban against partisan politicking of members of the civil service. Plus, the administration administration has the capability to intimidate the business community. They never shut down the BIR, the Bureau of Customs, which are traditionally shut down during Christmas season to prevent them from extorting money from business. But they are not shut down during campaign season. This is open season for the administration to turn the screws on big business. It's so easy. If you are in City Hall, just ask every business establishment, just inspect every business establishment, and carry the implicit threat that you might cancel the permit and close down instantaneously the business establishment. I have known for a fact City Hall inspectors bringing their own dead cockroaches in a paper bag and going to Chinese restaurant establishments in Ermita and dropping the dead cockroaches in the bathroom and then pointing it out to the owner and telling the owner he's about to have his permit cancelled unless he makes a campaign contribution. So, my answer clearly is for any election, including this one, the strongest opponent is always the administration candidate. Now you're asking me to evaluate the other candidates. I will try and do so as a political scientist. I majored in political science, and as much as possible, I'd like to avoid making partisan statements, although of course you realize this is extremely difficult. In the case of the Venecia, the speakership is simply the wrong platform to stand on. It's just the wrong jumping board. Notice the case of Speaker Mitra. People just look on the speaker, whoever he might be. Remember our premises? This is a corrupt and poor country. In our country, people look on the speaker as the archetypal, as the paradigmatic corrupt politician, the archetypal practitioner of politics of money. In other words, the pork barrel. And in the case of Speaker de Venecia, he is on record, not only as defending pork barrel, but asking for its increase. So that would be his biggest handicap. The public perception that the Speaker of the House, particularly this Speaker, practices the politics of money. In the case of Mr. Estrada, his biggest handicap, contrary to other analysts, in my mind, if I were still a magazine columnist, I was a magazine and opinion writer for several years, as you might know, Jim. In the case of Mr. Estrada, I respectfully beg to disagree with the armchair analysts in Metro Manila who never go out to the field and yet are full of political opinions. It never ceases to amaze me. But in any event, for me, his biggest handicap is this. He has a critical mass of supporters who are willing to die for him. There's just nothing you can say against him. He just has this core group of fans of his. They will die for him as vice presidential candidate, but even they will not vote for him for president. I am willing to concede that in 92 or maybe in 98, Mr. Estrada might be unbeatable as a vice presidential candidate. I would hesitate to run for vice president against Mr. Estrada. But my theory is, as a presidential candidate, he is eminently beatable because it goes against the grain of the Filipino, no matter how illiterate. Remember that you must inculturate political analysis. You must analyze within the political culture. This is a political culture where education is the highest priority. More so than in any other Asian and very much more so than in the Western countries. What is the first thing you see when you go up the house of a peasant in the countryside? The diplomas of his children. Talk to him for 10 minutes. What's the first thing he will try and insinuate into the conversation? That his children are going to this or that school or that they're graduating with honors. Ang pinakamahirap na Pilipino, yun ang pinagmamalaki. Ang anak ko nag-i-eskwela sa ganito, sa ganyan. And Mr. Estrada directly violates and fails to live up to this cultural expectation of the leader as an intellectual leader at the same time. That's my analysis. Some people say it's his health, some people say it's his morals, but this of course will also be liabilities. But in my case, for me, his strongest handicap is people will not vote for him for president. They think they simply deserve better. Who else do you want me to analyze?
Mrs. Marcos and Mr. De Villa.
Well, in the case of Mrs. Marcos, she only started making noises about running after she was convicted by the Supreme Court. We know that the decision has not yet become final and executory, but as a practicing lawyer, I think all lawyers will agree with me here that there is less than 1% chance a tribunal reversing itself when no new legal point has been raised in the motion for reconsideration. In fact, the law limits a motion for reconsideration only to 4 grounds. There's fraud, there was accident, there's mistake, or there's excusable negligence. None of these factors are present in the case of the conviction of Mrs. Marcos. So, statistically speaking, she just doesn't have a prayer. She doesn't have a Chinaman's chance. So her candidacy is actually meant to pressure the Supreme Court. And who else was the other one?
The Defense Secretary De Villa.
First, let me tell you, once Mr. De Villa becomes a strong candidate, he will immediately polarize the armed forces of the Philippines. I think you can research this for yourself on your own efforts. You know that there is a pro and an anti-De Villa faction both within the present armed forces. YOU and DRUM are definitely anti-De Villa. If he becomes a strong candidate, RAM and YOU might go to extreme lengths to prevent his victory. But at present, there is no such danger because his candidacy is not picking up, particularly in the light of the pronouncement by the COMELEC chair that the COMELEC itself, by itself, motu proprio, without waiting for a third party, is going to try and see if they can disqualify him on the ground that he does not belong to a registered party. Ang problema ni Mr. De Villa, hindi kamukha ng ibang kandidato pagkapangulo na walang partido. Kaya ang ginawa nila, pumunta sila sa partido na accredited na ng COMELEC at binili nila. That's what they did. That's how come they got a party. So instantaneously, instant political party already accredited by the COMELEC. In my case, I had to create my party, then I had to go to COMELEC and wait for it to be accredited. But in the case of at least one candidate, overnight, instantaneous, like instant lapas batchoy, kaagad, may partidong akreditado na, and listed by the COMELEC as one of the major political parties, palibasa, binili niya.
I have just a curious last question. We all know how the Aquino presidency treated the Marcoses. How will a Santiago presidency treat the Ramoses?
The Ramoses. Well, in the case of Aquino and Marcos, Marcos was charged criminally. So, the prosecution of the Marcoses was judicial in nature. In the case of the Ramoses, no case has been filed against them, so I treat them exactly as citizens. My own personal perception is that not the Ramoses, but just one Ramos, Fidel V. Ramos, so far as I am concerned, is a very low life form. He is very low on the food chain. But because I am a Christian, I am willing to treat him exactly the way I would treat any other citizen of the Republic.